The United States' decision to impose tariffs on Australian steel and aluminium as part of a global decision are concerning. It has been foreshadowed that no country, regardless of its relationship with the United States, has been granted an exemption. Such a decision by the Trump administration is entirely unjustified. This is against the spirit of our two nations' enduring friendship and fundamentally at odds with the benefits that our economic partnership has delivered over more than 70 years. Australia has no tariffs on goods from the United States, and of course we have a free trade agreement with the United States.
OK, that was the Prime Minister there in Sydney, there to address the Trump administration's decision to go ahead with 25% tariffs on Australian steel and aluminium. We have not been granted that exemption that was apparently being considered. Now, Anthony Albanese says this is entirely unjustified and at odds with our economic partnership free trade agreement. He will not be imposing tariffs in response to this. The Prime Minister says his government will continue to work for an exemption, noting that this can take months. Now let's bring in our political reporter Olivia Casely. Olivia, words from the PM, action to follow, but not in the form of retaliatory tariffs. It'll be in further discussions.
Really strong comments from Anthony Albanese in response to the Trump administration's decision to slap tariffs of up to 25% on steel and aluminium. And that applies not only to Australia, but all countries. And Mr. Albanese there describing this decision as entirely unjustified. He says it's an act of economic self-harm and ultimately something that's going to only hurt American consumers. It is the strongest language we've heard to date from members of the Albanese government, indeed the Prime Minister, when it comes to policy decisions being made by the Trump administration 2.0. Mr. Albanese making the point that we're not going to be engaging in economic tit for tat and retaliating with economic sanctions of our own on the United States. It's clear, though, from his language, there is a sense of disappointment within the government. It follows that very friendly phone call between the Prime Minister and Donald Trump just last month, in which the US President did confirm that ultimately he was going to be deeply considering carving out Australia from these tariffs. We'll remember that in the past, Mr. Trump had granted Australia exemptions when former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull was leader of the country. It was something that the Albanese government was hoping to replicate, but it's clear that this time around, Donald Trump wasn't willing to play ball.
And what is the economic impact on Australia expected to be?
Well, look, speaking with Cabinet sources, they say that the immediate economic impact of this specific decision will be negligible. After all, steel and aluminium exports only makes up 0.2% of the economy. The bigger concern is around a broader trade war between, say, China and the United States. That would have a much bigger flow-on effect, greater ramifications here in Australia. As we know, there is an election just around the corner, and the cost of living is front of mind for voters. That's something that they're incredibly concerned about. So it was interesting to hear there from the Prime Minister. He was specifically flagging that there would be further cost of living relief in the upcoming budget, which will be handed down on March 25. When we go to the raw politics of this, we've seen the coalition setting up a bit of a test for the Albanese government in recent weeks, essentially saying that if the government fails to secure these tariff carve-outs, it's a failure of leadership. They've also said that if Mr Albanese had travelled to Washington DC and built that personal rapport with Donald Trump, we would have been more likely to get exemptions. But Mr Albanese spoke to that very point just before our viewers may have heard. He essentially says, well, if that was the case, other world leaders that had gone to Washington would have got an exemption, and ultimately these tariffs are universal and no country will be exempt from them.